Morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Nastassia Arendse. Today, we're going to be talking about the investment case for a company called OneLogix. It is a niche logistics provider with logistics experience gained over 27 years of operation. It was listed on the JSE AltX in 2004 and in 2013 transferred to the main board transportation services sector. The company offers a range of specialized logistics services to markets in South, Southern, and East Africa. And today we're going to be talking to Ian Lourens, who's the co-founder of OneLogix, and he'll be taking us through the investment case for the business. The team from Easy Equities will once again give away 50 Rand vouchers to webinar attendees, while the Fin Me Up team have agreed to give away one of their courses. And that course giveaway will take place on their platform on Wednesday, the latest, and they will be in touch with the winner. Ian, thank you so much for your time this morning. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Natasha, and good morning to everybody. I hope that you can see my slides clearly, and I hope that you're getting my voice clearly. I understand all is working well. Natasha, just to pick it up from what you've said, I'm going to take us through the OneLogix case. And it's interesting that we've just released our year-end financial results for the year ending May 2020. I'll be referring to that. I've got a presentation that I did use for those presentation results, which I'm essentially going to follow, but I will be moving around a little bit out of sequence, so just bear with me while I do that. So just to pick up on what Natasha has said, OneLogix is we see ourselves as a specialist logistics service provider. We've been the various companies in the group, of which there are 12, been around for many, many years, some of them for in excess of 27, 28 years, as has been said. We've acquired about 12 companies in the period since we've been listed, which is about 20 years. We've also started up 4 companies as well. Every single acquisition we've made has been an unqualified success, and every single business we've started up in-house has been successful. There's been no failure, is what I'm saying, in other words. So we kind of are circumspect in the way in which we operate. We don't make crazy decisions. One of the reasons we're able to do this, I think, is that management owns a substantial shareholding. It's under 50%. I have got a slide, and I can address that if there's any questions relating to that. But perhaps I can just talk to you about what we call the X factor. OneLogix is spelled with an X. We've chosen X factor just to try and talk about that gives us our competitive advantage. And I've got a couple of things here which perhaps I can just mention to you. We've already spoken about the fact that we're well-established niche logistics provider. We've got a footprint across the whole of South Africa and the neighboring countries, the neighboring Southern African countries. The place that we conduct our business in is South Africa, the Republic of South Africa, and the SADC countries, the SADC countries. We've got 12 businesses in the group. Each of them has a very strong market position. In other words, we typically don't like to acquire businesses that are just in the very startup phase. We would rather take that risk ourselves to start a business and make it work, as opposed to acquiring a business. We acquire businesses that have a proven track record, where the entrepreneur is still in charge of that business and does not want to sell their business to us and then wash his hands of it and go off fishing after he's given a 2-year profit warranty to us. But rather somebody who says that this company is being hamstrung by, for example, I've got to fund it out of my own personal balance sheet, and I'm reaching the limits of what I can afford to do, or my staffing capacity is also reaching its limits. As I said, my financing capacities, my capacity to manage the business is getting a little bit strained. I need a partner. And that's where we come in, where we'll partner with them, not take 100% share of the business typically, but take a majority stake, and then provide them with a platform that allows them to go and do what they do best, and that's to make something out of nothing, because that's what entrepreneurs do. They can see things that other people can't see. They know the market very well. They're not professional managers, are only in the job for a couple of years and then will move on looking for a promotion in a larger organization. They want to be in this particular specific business that they know very well. And it turns out very often that they are able to run rings around professional managers who literally come in, learn the business, are active maybe for 3-4 years and then move on. That does give us a competitive advantage. So you can see that our company structure is very empowering and entrepreneurial. We use a lot of analytics. In other words, we've got a huge data base of any number of things which relate to fuel consumption and tire usage and driver behavior and trips and load capacities and load configurations. You can name it. I can carry on for a whole host of time. And the trick is to take that information and get it available to those that make the decision at the right time. And typically that's immediately. You really want that information to become immediately available. You need to be sure that that information you have is close as damn it to 100% correct, and then presented in a way that the guys that make the various decisions in the companies are able to act on that. And in fact, that's what we've got. We, for example, amongst many things, have, for most of our companies, a real-time income statement per truck. So we will know this morning how our trucks behaved up until yesterday and which ones are running profitably and which ones are not. And if they're not, we can actually drill down into the information and work out what's going wrong. It might be that the engine's not working and it was only planned to have go into the workshop in maybe a month and a half's time, but it looks like something's risen, for example, earlier than what it should. Or it might be driver behavior, or it might be the wrong loads, or it might be that they've around times that a customer is not acceptable. Whatever the case might be, we're able to pick those up and intervene. And the result of that means that we can actually manage the productivity of the business better than what we could before. Clearly, what's happening in the market right now is that we're under tremendous pricing pressure, as is everybody. But logistics companies particularly, because we are beholden to the GDP. GDP grows, logistics grows. GDP contracts, logistics items contract. What do? There's more people competing in the marketplace. We've got to be smarter than them in order to either maintain our market share or to grow our market share. And the only way we can do that is to be more productive. And this is a major focus of ours. Is this number 5 item that I've got in terms of X factor analytics. We're very customer service focused. We've got good staff relations. Now, that sounds like a motherhood and apple pie statement. But let me just mention two facts that I think illustrate the point that I'm trying to make here. You can see there, we're a top employer. That top employer organization is an international body. It measures a whole lot of our HR metrics, some 150 odd different metrics. They measure according to not only South African, but also international standards. And then you get rated according to that. And if you jump through all the correct hoops, you then get declared as a top employer. And then obviously within those that get declared as top employers, they're category winners and things like that as well. There's two stats there that I'd like to draw to your attention. The one is that the staff turnover in our group over the last 10 years has been lower than national and international norms. But perhaps this one's the most telling. That inside the OneLogix Group, the extent at which sick leave is taken is lower than not only the national, but also the international average. And I think that's quite telling in terms of our company culture. People just don't take sick leave here. You know that as soon as things go awry, people decide, well, I'm not going to come to work today. I'll just take sick leave and that's it. I've spoken about acquisitions and how we actually assimilate acquisitions, management capabilities. I hope that will come through in more of my talking, and you'll see when I do carry on talking that we are a very cash generative business. There's the shareholding, and you can see that management has 47.7% of the shareholding. Our direct BE ownership is 20%. It's made up of our actual BE partners who are Kagiso Capital. They've got roughly 10%. And then we've got a staff share participation scheme where staff have a virtually 10%. It's all practical purposes, it is 10% of direct ownership of the organization. Institutions own about 12.5%, the biggest of which is Allan Gray that has just over 6% of the organization. And then we've got 2 United States companies, both based in New York, called Fidelity and Straight Street, that between them own 5%. And so you can see that 11% of institutions is made up of those 3 organizations. But in fact, there's a total of 16 institutions that own varying degrees of the business, down to sort of that below 1%. Brokers and individuals, pretty much same sort of thing. So let's say that that's some 19-20%, of which there are 23 brokers that manage investment in OneLogix on behalf of their customers. It's not the slide I wanted to get to, is it? Okay, so let me now maybe just quickly take you through our financial numbers as we presented them to the market some 2 weeks ago. It's not here. All right, those numbers, I don't know, for some reason they're not on the slide, but I'd nonetheless like to talk to you about them. We, like everybody else, felt the COVID-19 pandemic, in fact, societal lockdown, the worldwide societal lockdown, something that we've never ever experienced in the history of the world. Unsurprisingly, we were also affected by it. Our year end is May, so we obviously had March, which was just half a month really, April and May, which affected us quite substantially. And the net result of that is that it compounded a poor economic environment for the first 10 months of the year. So we really got hit by a double whammy, as I said, as did everybody. And the long and the short of it is that our revenue was down by 4%, 2.62 billion for the year. Our EBITDA was also down by 12%, 349 million. Our trading profit was also down by 33%, 135.1 million. And then I think as a shareholder, our core HEPS and diluted core HEPS were down by 42% to 22.2 cents a share. Now, here is maybe a way in which I can illustrate to you the extent that the COVID pandemic affected us. At interim period, which is our November results, which we announced in February of this year, we were 24% down on core HEPS and diluted core HEPS. At the end of the year, 22% down. So that's some 18%, and by and large, that can be ascribed almost directly to COVID. COVID also would have affected us to the extent of about profit before tax of roughly 30 million is our calculation. So the point I think has been made. But what I'd like to also say to you is if you have a look at our NAV per share and our NTAV per share, those are up by 7% each, which we were very happy about. So we have actually protected shareholders' value to that extent, that the asset value of the business is actually on the improvement. We decided not to declare a dividend because we thought that was the prudent thing to do. We were trying to become a regular dividend payer, and we'd managed to do that up until our year end of May 2019. We didn't declare a dividend in the interim period of our 220 year, and neither at the end of that year as well. The other big thing relating to our numbers is that our debt has been reduced. So if you, and I'll take you through that a little bit later, because I think before I talk about that in more detail, I'd like to just share with you the biggest single capital investment that the group has made to date, which is Umlaas Road. And I'm going to do that for you quickly now. Now, we refer to this as Umlaas Road. It's really the geographic location at which this development is taking place. Those of you that have ever run the Comrades, you'll know that Umlaas Road is you're either very close to the finish or you've actually just started. But it's a well-known point on the Comrades calendar. If you have a look at that picture in the top right-hand corner, you'll see N3 highway disappearing over the hill into Pietermaritzburg. This site is some 10 kilometers south of Pietermaritzburg. And if you have a look also at the top of the picture, you'll see blue shade netting, and then adjacent to that shade netting, a whole host of vehicles that are parked. That we refer to as Umlaas Phase 1 and Umlaas Phase 2. That's a development that we started with way back in 2015, and we completed that in October 2017, and on that development, which we developed off our own balance sheet, to the extent of about 240 million rand, a quarter of a billion rand. We then did a sale and leaseback with an organization for a 10-year period. And in that lease, we obviously paid a market-related lease, but there was a thing called a lease premium. And I just need to mention that to you because it relates to a certain amount of cash being released when we do the later financial transaction, which I'll talk about in a couple of seconds. So that was very successful for us, and it affected two of our businesses in particular, and I'm going to take you through each of the businesses a little bit later, just to give you an idea of what comprises the OneLogix Group. But it affected basically our vehicle movement business, and we move vehicles of the motor car, the sedan type, and also trucks. And those two businesses are VDS and OneLogix, and they were benefited by this development. And we decided to go ahead with Umlaas Phase 3, which you can see in the foreground of the picture that's in front of you now. The picture was taken about a month ago. This total development should be finished by the end of October, but it seems to be more likely by the middle of November. And what it's going to produce is, if you have a look at on the left-hand side of that that's in the foreground, you can see those shade nets that are appearing in the top left-hand part of that development. That whole development that you see there will be under shade netting, and that will be for the parking of motor cars, and then I'll talk about this a little bit later, but also tractors and agricultural equipment, and there'll also be a modicum of trucks that will be parked in that area. On the lower level, you can't really see that it's a lower level because it's taken from such a height, but the bottom area there where you can see that warehouse that's presently being constructed. That warehouse is 5,500 square meters. And then just adjacent to it on the right-hand side, you'll see an office component. It's going to be the office component of another business of ours called OneLogix Projects, which is relocating in its entirety from the Durban Harbour. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that just now. They will obviously make use of this facility also for their customers and the storage of their customers' equipment as well. And then also that warehouse is going to be used by two other businesses of ours, which I'll get to in a moment. I don't want to get waylaid by the detail of the businesses, but I rather want to just talk to you about the scale of this development for us and how we're actually going to digest a scale of development of this magnitude. It's not going to be debilitating to the business. So I've already mentioned to you that those two blue-colored developments right in the far north of this building constituted what we call Umlaas Phase 1 and 2. We did a sale and lease back at 240 million rand, which allowed us then to settle all the debt, at least an amount of cash, and we had an achterskot or a lease premium that would be payable to us at the end of the 10-year lease. We're now 3 years into that lease, and we're ready to talk to the same organization, and we've actually published this on the Stock Exchange News Service. In fact, we've reached to a deal just requiring confirmation from a number of bodies, not the least of which is the Competitions Commission because of its size, and then also our shareholders and our board of directors are required to give some approval for this as well. But we're proposing to do a sale and leaseback, the total development cost, which will be 310 million rand. Of that 310 million rand, roughly half is debt finance, and the other half is equity, is cash that we funded from our own balance sheet, our own trading to put in this development. And obviously, at the time of doing the deal, we'll release that money, half of which will come to us as an organization, and the other half will go to settling the debt we've had for it. And then in addition to that, the further release of the lease premium of Phase 1 and 2, because we're going to synchronize the two deals, and that's going to produce a further 60-odd million rand for us as well. So we're going to be sitting with a reasonable amount of cash at the time of this transaction being approved. And as I said, there's still certain issues that have to be dealt with in terms of the approval, but all going well, we expect that approval to be in place by the end of this year, or the latest, the early part of the new year. So let me just move on after having made this point. And Nastassia, can I just ask, are we going to ask questions going to be asked at the end of the presentation, or will there be interruptions as I'm going on? I'm happy either way.
The questions will be towards the end. So as soon as you've wrapped up, then we'll have a look at the Q&A section to see some of the questions coming through.
Okay, thank you for that, Garden. Okay, so I'll try and not talk too much. I mean, I'm happy to talk for days on this business, which we love, but I'll try and be as brief as I possibly can. Just to maybe make this point before we move on to other issues. The initial phase, the two really big beneficiaries of this development were our businesses that moved motor cars and trucks. And then in the third phase, it's going to benefit both of those companies as well as a business called OneLogix Projects, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. Our cargo solutions business, which is a clearing and forwarding business, and another business called OneLogix Line Haul, which does a lot of work into Africa at the same time. I think that's probably all I need to talk about now. And if there's any questions, I'm more than happy, obviously, to talk about that as well. Here's another shot. This shot is simply taken from the entrance going into the development. And if you look very carefully, I'm not sure how clearly you can see it. This is taken from some height. And just to get an idea of the size of this, you have a look at the cars parked on the right-hand side, you potentially get an idea of the size of it. It's something like 130 rugby fields side by side. And this is just phase 3. All right. So let me briefly then take you through the way in which we segment our business. I'll take you through the constituent parts. I mentioned that there's 12 businesses in the group. Very briefly, I'll take you through what they do so you can get an idea as to what part of the logistics markets we're exposed to and how we fare in those markets. And it'll also give you a reasonable idea to what the prognosis for this business is going forward. So our first segment, we're compelled to divide our business into segments by the stock exchange. They always don't really fit the way in which we do it, but by and large, this does make sense. And the first segment is what we call abnormal logistics. And abnormal logistics is made up of VDS, which is the vehicle movement facility we have, and you can see a picture there of those trucks. You would have seen those on the roads. We have about 30, we estimate about 30% of the local market in South Africa, and we estimate that we have about 95% of what we call the cross-border market, which is to move vehicles from South Africa into Southern Africa. It's a very well-established business, very sophisticated business. There's a lot of moving parts. It's a complicated business, you can imagine. And what we've got right at this point in time is that we offer an end-to-end supply chain solution for our customers. And perhaps I can illustrate it best by giving you an example of one of our customers. There are several, by the way, but I'm just using one customer to illustrate the point. Havel, you might have seen that Havel, and I've mentioned we do this for many other customers, but Havel has really made quite a presence in the marketplace. It's a Chinese vehicle, a good quality vehicle that is making some inroads into the local market because it's a good vehicle at a good price. And what we do for them is they simply have a head office facility, and they never ever see their motor car ever, unless they choose to go and have a look at it. But frankly, they don't even need to ever see their motor car. They will be able to pick up by the electronic media. We have huge interaction with them in terms of data that we share with them. We will do the clearing and forwarding. In other words, when the ship arrives in the Durban Harbour, we will arrange for that ship, the docking time, when it offloads, the procedures, all the administrative procedures to offload those vehicles, to get them onto the port, the Durban port, to actually collect them with our own, these trucks that you see the picture of, to take them to our storage facility, to go through the process of what we call mothballing when we look after those vehicles, but some obviously will stay there for a longer period than others. And there's certain protocols you've got to make sure that you look after so that the car is not damaged in the process of storage. You can imagine little things like windscreen wipers will get stuck on the windscreen, or fuel doesn't behave too well in the carburetor if it just stands, and things like that. And then what we'll do is when it gets sold, we'll do all the pre-delivery inspection processes that have to be adhered to, and there's many parts to that. For example, we'll data dot it. We'll put all the fitments in that have to take place. I mean, if there's any panel beating or paint work that needs to get done, we would do that. And then finally, we put it on our truck and we take it to the dealer network, make sure that it's offloaded, and then obviously do all the administrative work that we need to do for all the parties that are involved. And we do that for a number of customers. We do that for vehicles that come into South Africa and also vehicles that go out of South Africa. You know that South Africa has got quite a big initiative in terms of producing vehicles, part of our manufacturing initiative in the country, producing vehicles that get exported around the world. And obviously we're very closely involved with that market as well, in pretty much, in many instances, the same way, by way of example that I've shared with you now. We also make money clearly out of the storage, because every day that the car gets stored, there's a charge for that. And of course, I mentioned that we also then take vehicles into and out of Southern Africa as well. So VDS is a cornerstone business. It constitutes probably about 30% of the profit of the business. The other business that moves vehicles is what we call TruckLogix. And you can see on the right-hand picture there, trucks are much bigger than motor cars. Under the blue canopies, we'll store motor cars, but we can't fit them under trucks because of the size. And they'll be stored with military precision, as you've seen over there. And an increasing extent now also transported on the back of trailers, although most, by quite some way, are driven in convoy. And you would have seen convoys of trucks like driving around. That'll be us, because we've got pretty much 95% of the total market in South Africa for this business. Also, a good quality business. This is a startup business, by the way, that we started in this group 13 years ago, and it constitutes around about 8% of the total turnover of the business. This is the business we call Project. And that's how, you might remember I said this business is relocating lock, stock and barrel from our Bayhead facility in the Durban Harbour to the Umlaas facility. And what they do is they do project-related work. And you can see a nice example there on that left-hand side. That's a crusher that went off to a mine in Zambia. Clearly, obviously that's at the harbour, taking the product off the ship and putting it onto our truck. And you can see that the truck is a very specialised truck. And OneLogix Project, we've just got the X. Our clever marketing guys made sure that the X for projects just match the X with OneLogix, but it's a project-related type of thing. And on the right-hand side, I've just put a picture in. You can see of tractors. We do the same thing for tractors as we do for motor cars and trucks. Trucks, by the way, I didn't mention to you earlier on, but they come into South Africa typically in a knockdown form. There's almost no manufacturing of trucks in South Africa. They typically get imported in knockdown form. We collect them in knockdown form. We assemble them for many of our customers, store them and distribute them. And we're doing the same now for agricultural equipment. I've just got tractors in there, but you can imagine there's all sorts of sowing and reaping and cutting material vehicles as well, which we can handle at Umlaas Road, and we'll store them and deliver them pretty much like you would a truck or even a motor car. That's OneLogix Projects. It constitutes a smallish part of the business, only about 4% or so of the business. And then we go. This slide is a summary of the 3 businesses that are in our abnormal logistics component, and I've pretty much covered all of that for you. I'll move on to our second segment, which we call primary product logistics. Those of you that do geography from it might remember that primary products are things like mining equipment, agricultural type of stuff, and that's exactly what we do here. The first of the businesses is what we call United Bulk. There's a tanker that you can see there that happens to be an LPG, liquefied petroleum gas tanker. But we also do a lot of work in that market for the mines in terms of acid, very specific tankers that are required there, solvents, base oils, food grade products, things like milk, juices, wine, and the like. LPG, that's the tanker that you see in front of you on the left-hand side of your screen. And we also do cryogenics, which would be things like liquefied oxygen or carbon dioxide or nitrogen and so on. And on the right-hand side is a picture of one of our premises for this business in Vereniging. It's a big part of our business, not performing optimally at this point in time. And we've got some rectification measures which we've got in place now, which we've been busy working on for the best part of 8-9 months. And we're starting to show a lot of improvement there. And those improvements really relate to those analytics that I spoke to you about, which just allows us to analyze how our assets are actually working and are they working to their best possible extent. And that, I must say, is starting to work quite well for us. That's liquid bulk. Second company that falls into this category is what we call OneLogix line haul. Now, for those of you that have been exposed to logistics will know that line haul typically is a generic term that relates to a truck onto which you can put anything. If you have a look at those trucks on the left-hand side, you'll see they're not particularly specialized. They're simply flat decks, to which you can put any type of material, provided you secure them properly. And it just happens that the picture that you can see there are fuel tanks, which were going from South Africa into Zambia. But on those trailers, we would put any number of stuff that we would take into Southern Africa. So it would be anything that you can think of that is infrastructure related, infrastructure for the mines, infrastructure for the things like roads, water infrastructure, rail infrastructure, and that sort of thing. I mean, we're just taking up at the moment a whole lot of bitumen for a big road powering network that's in place in Zambia, and all the concrete edifices there, the stormwater drains, and you can imagine all the street lighting and that sort of thing comes from here, and we take that up. We also do a lot of work for the World Food Program. We're a specified supplier for the World Food Program over the years. They found us to be reliable and cost effective, and they make extensive use for us, particularly to take product into Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is a recipient of the World Food Program to quite some extent, and we see it in terms of what we take up. It's a lot that goes up there, and we do fairly well out of that. We take up a whole host of other things. I mean, we've been taking up a lot of beer, for example. You can imagine there's anything that, in terms of us being really opportunistic in the market, which will also fill up those trucks going up. But what do we do when we come back down? Well, as you know, in logistics, you don't want to have an empty truck because that costs you money and you're not making any revenue. So you try and get your trucks full as you can, or going to a point, and then on the return trip, you want to keep that as busy and as full as possible. And what we bring back down from Southern Africa are things typically raw material related, because that's the major export that comes from Africa, is raw material. They don't produce much other than digging things out of the ground. And we bring back copper cathodes, copper concentrate, cobalt, nickel, chrome, agricultural stuff like sugar and the like also comes down. And that's how we balance our load. You can see on the right-hand side that our premises for line haul, that's in Backland, just off the highway that leads into the PWV. It's a sizable operation. It constitutes just under 10% of the operation. And I think I mentioned to you that for Umlaas Road, line haul is going to be quite a big player there now, because a lot of the cobalt and nickel and chrome and even copper that we bring down, we'll store in that warehouse that you saw being constructed over there. And we're able to do that at a very efficient rate for our customers, and that's an added arrow to our armory. And line haul is going to be a big recipient of that. Last two businesses in this category are agricultural. The first one is Jackson. You can see their premises on the right-hand side. That's in fact adjacent to our line haul premises. So if you look at that picture in the foreground and look at the right-hand side, top right-hand side of that, you'll see that's line haul's premises, and right next to that is Jackson's premises. Now Jackson move agricultural product in its chilled form, and they would very much like me to remind you that it's not refrigerated, because refrigerated simply means you turn the cooling equipment on as hard as you can, and there's not too much skill in that, but there's a lot of skill in terms of making it chilled, because there's a certain temperature range for certain products that are required. So, for example, for avos, would be a very clearly defined temperature range at which that product has to be transported. And what we do here is we typically collect product from the farmer itself. And as you know, there's a lot of farms now that are very large. They're industrial, literally, in scale. And they represent a lot of our customers, although we deal a lot with smaller farmers as well. Just to illustrate the point, so on the left-hand side, those are bananas that are being collected in Mozambique. Mozambique's been very, very clever in terms of providing support for farmers, and it's bearing fruit. And thankfully, we're getting a lot of that work. This happens to be ex-South African farmers that are the recipient of Mozambique aid, and they've got a massive banana plant, which we collect and take that the harbour to where it gets exported. And similarly there, you would have to make sure that you have a temperature range that actually does no damage to that product, because particularly if it gets exported, the quality of that product has to be absolutely spot on. And your delivery time has to be absolutely spot on as well, because there's a ship waiting at the harbour, and it only has a certain time that it can be berthed, and you have to get the product into the ship in an undamaged form as soon as possible. If you miss that ship, the next one's going to be around in 2 months' time, and that product would be finished. So you can see that there's a huge speciality in terms of this product, and I hope that you also see in the other businesses that I've mentioned to you that there's a high degree of specialization, which really means that we can say that we're niched. Remember at the outset I said we're a specialized logistics service provider. And that's really because we occupy a lot of niches where there's fairly high barriers to entry, not the least of which is your equipment, the way in which you operate, and your IT facilities. And that's the case certainly with Jackson. The other agricultural business we call Buffelshoek. It's based in Mokgopong, the old Marble Spruit. It moves agricultural product at ambient temperature. So there's no question of having to have complicated and sophisticated temperature regulating equipment. They would typically move, you can see in this picture there's animal feed at the back. In the middle truck, that's onions that are being moved. And we'd move any number of stuff. So when we go into the farms, excuse me, we would move fertilizer, which we've just finished our big round of fertilizer now, and we'd take it in loose or bagged or palletized form. We take animal feed, as you see over there. We take seeds, which we've just finished another round of into the ground. We would take pipes, fencing, cement, which is input that the farmers need to have. And then because you can see these trucks are able to take a lot of other equipment, because it's literally a standard. We're also now getting into general freight as well, to cover us for when we've got loads that are not full, or alternatively times when the agricultural market goes through downturns. It's very seasonal, of course. We balance that general freight during the unseasonal period as well. And what they'd collect from the farmers would be things that are, as I said, do not necessarily have to be handled with gloves. Things like potatoes, Simba chips. We move a huge amount of that. We move maize. We move corn. We move a whole lot of vegetables. You've seen onions over there, but we would move pumpkins, fruit like watermelon, and a lot of citrus. We would move as well. So that business does well for us as well. It's small in the scheme of things, about 3% of the business. And there are the businesses made up the primary logistics segment. The last segment, and I'm starting to come to an end, Natasha, so I'll be more than happy to take questions. The last segment is small. It only constitutes some 8% of the revenue of the group. The biggest part of that 8% is made up of a business called Atlas 360. Now, before I go into that, maybe I should just make this point to you. The first two segments were us being active players in the logistics market. In other words, we moved stuff around the country and around Africa. The logistics services component provides logistics services to those players, including ourselves, who are active in the logistics market. So here's an example. Atlas 360 is a quick repair business. In the old parlance, the guys don't like me to use this language, but they're panel beaters for trucks. All fix up. There on the left-hand side, you can see they're finishing off in the spray booth a truck that would have been completely restored after having had an accident. And you can see their premises on the right-hand side. That's in Springs, New Era. Watt Road, for those of you that know Springs as well as what I do. And we are the leading, and we're happy to say this because we've done quite a lot of research to make sure that we are able to make the claim, but we're the leading repair business in the country. And of course, we have to jump through a whole lot of hoops to make sure that we can do work for the OEMs, the equipment manufacturers. So you can see a Volvo truck in that picture on the left-hand side. Volvo need to be 100% certain, as do all the others that we do work for. We can, during the time of warranty for that truck, that they're prepared to delegate the responsibility of fixing that pickup to us, and that we would do this to their satisfaction, they could continue to offer that. Similarly, with the insurance companies, one's got to jump through a whole host of hoops to make sure that you meet all the criteria that they have as well. So it is also a complicated business with a lot of moving parts. We have a business called Cranbourne Panel Beaters, which is based in Benoni. Now, this shouldn't really come as a surprise. I think mentioned when I spoke about Umlaas Road, we have a facility there to do panel beating as part of our PDI, pre-delivery inspection process. And this is really just our panel beating facility up here to allow us to do that as well. This one runs as a fully fledged retail operator as well, and it has done for the best part of 35 years. Those of you that are listening to me and know the Benoni area well, you'll know Cranbourne from years and years. It's actually in the second generation of ownership. Very good business, newly acquired. It's our latest acquisition, but going on 3 years old, and it contributes some less than 1% to the overall profit of the business. Our clearing and forwarding business is called Cargo Solutions. It does clearing and forwarding for a lot of products like glass and paper and food products, particularly dog food. But the picture I've shown here is what it does, and it works very closely with VDS for the clearing and forwarding of motor vehicles. That ship happens to be known as a RoRo, R-O-R-O. It's so named because it's ride on, ride off. It's literally a parking garage covered with metal, and it goes around the world and it moves motor cars. And here the cars getting disgorged onto the harbour, and we would, as I said, all the clearing and forwarding for a whole host of original equipment manufacturers from around the world when their cars get imported into South Africa. We have a warehousing company, which you'd imagine that a logistics company would need to have. We have 3 big warehousing components. We have this one in Sydney Road in the Durban Harbour precinct. We're also in Bayhead, which is even closer to the harbour, and we're also in the Cape Town Airport facility. Now, they do their own warehousing, but to a large extent it becomes a complementary service for the other parts of the group as well. Because we are able to offer warehousing means that we can then obviously get more easily into the distribution of the product as well. And those are the businesses in the group that constitute the other logistics services. And I think that's really brought me to an end, Natasha. I've got some general information on our being a good corporate citizen, but I think I'm going to leave that because I'm sure people are getting tired of hearing my voice. Any questions, if there are any questions on that? So I'm more than happy now to pick up any questions at your behest.
Okay, cool. So we're going to start off with the first question that came in a while ago, and it says, is there a risk that OneLogix will delist? That being small caps are battling to justify being listed based on the valuations. And part 2 of that says, are management the major shareholders right now?
Are management the major shareholding group? Is that what you said?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. Right, so the answer is, if you've been following OneLogix, you'll be aware that we have been doing share buybacks from mid-October of 2017. The biggest, by the way, share buyback process we had was during this last financial year, where we bought 15.5 million shares, and we spent 48 million rand in doing that. In total, since we've started the share buyback, excuse me, some 3 years ago, we've bought just under 25 million shares for 76.5 odd million rand. So yes, the fact is we are buying back our shares. And the reason we're doing that is because we see it as incredibly cheap. And we see that one of the best investments we can make is to buy ourselves. We know exactly what we're doing. We who've got the shares are not sellers. We are, as you can see, we're buyers. We believe this business has got a long runway to go, and there's no way that we would even contemplate selling our shareholding at these sort of prices. Does that mean that we may delist? We've made no formal decision regarding that. It does remain a possibility, because that sort of thing at these share prices becomes quite a compelling argument. But there's no, as I said, there's been no formal decision taken by our board at this stage. Natasha, there was a second part, and that relates to shareholding. And yes, management shareholding at this point in time is just under 48% of the shares are held by management.
Okay, the next question says, in terms of executive remuneration, how do you align shareholders and management, particularly in light of the tough equity market?
Okay, so perhaps I can just go to this point here. No, I don't have, I thought I had the slide here, I don't. So at our AGM, our last AGM, we had some 85% of the shares that could be voted were present at the AGM, and we had something like a 99% acceptance of our remuneration policies and the detail relating to payment to non-executive directors, executive directors, and staff. So there's certainly no contention in terms of remuneration by way of shareholders' discontent. There's no discontent whatsoever. Having said that, how do we manage that with the difficult equity market right now? Well, I can mention to you that we've had a share participation scheme which has taken place over the last 5 years. And I'm afraid to say that because of the equity market's performance, that equity scheme is actually presently underwater. And that's really a function of the share price. It hasn't worked in our favor. Thankfully, I think our management has managed that to the extent that it's not a major demotivator. It is a demotivator, but it, I think, minimized the extent to which the demotivation actually occurred. So that would be an example of how we do that. We still, obviously, the remuneration we offer has got several components to it. I mean, there's your salary that gets paid, which is dependent upon certain performance. There's salary incentives in terms of bonuses, which get paid by way of a short-term bonus scheme, which is related to performance. And then there's the longer-term remuneration, which relates to things like participation in shares or having performance related to the share performance of the group. And as I said, in the long term, it's been demotivating, but in the short and medium term component, we haven't had any major problems with that. But it hasn't been a debilitating period at all for us.
Okay, the next question reads, for interest's sake, who are your largest competitors in the market that you're in?
Okay, so you'll see that we see ourselves as specialist logistics service providers. And so what happens is that in each of those markets, we have specific customers, specific competitors who compete with us, not in other markets. So let me take you through the main markets as I've mentioned them to you. If you have a look at, and I'm just quickly scrolling back in terms of the motor vehicle market, we compete with a listed company called Grindrod, and then unlisted companies called Motorvia and a company called TAC. In terms of OneLogix business, I mentioned to you that we dominate that market to a huge extent, to the extent that it's 95%. So there's small players that work on specific routes, not so much on a national basis. Names that probably wouldn't mean anything to you guys. Projects, that's a massive market that we operate in, because it really is anything that can fit onto those specialized trailers that we have. And by the way, we can also fit general freight onto that. So those of you that have maybe recently traveled on the N3 highway would have seen the number of trucks on that highway. I can tell you that in this market, probably 80% of those trucks that you see will be our competitors. And there's just a list there as long as your arm that I can give you names of. But no, there's not one that actually stands out more than any of the others. So I hope that is a satisfactory answer there. If we move on to United Bulk, we compete here with Imperial, and we compete with the business that is under the umbrella of Unitron. They would be our major competitors in the liquid bulk market. Line haul, similar to projects, there's any number of guys who've got flat decks, and they run around wherever the business is. And as a result of that, we have to be very, very careful that we choose the product types and the customer types that give us some basis of security and continuity. And rather this running from one little contract and another contract and being at the whim, a price taker and a market taker, really. We try and position ourselves in an area where we can actually secure long-term contracts in this market. Again, the list of competitors here is as long as my arm. Jackson competes with companies like Aspen, Histony, in many cases not directly but indirectly, as does Buffels Hook. Atlas, there are a number of panel beaters. I think probably the best known is Herman, a privately owned business which is based in Durban, Pretoria, and Centurion. And then the others, panel beating businesses, you'd know that there's a lot of those. There's been a lot of rationalization in this market of late, by the way. So there's been a lot of customers that have disappeared from the market. Clearing and forwarding, there are something like 2,000 clearing and forwarding businesses in Durban Harbour alone. It's a massive market. The bigger guys you would know, like Nachel and Bidvest, Panalpina, they're the two that spring to mind right now. There's many others. HL. We occupy a specific niche where we look to work together with the rest of the business, and that provides us with a continuity of income and a security of customer base. It works well for us. Warehousing, also, there's the bigger guys. Bidvest, Panalpina comes to mind once again. All the bigger clearing and forwarding companies, Nachel, you would have seen it. There's a whole host of them that are active in that particular market as well. I hope that answers that question. I can elaborate if there is a reason for me to do so, Natasha.
I think that should be fine. The next question says, what percentage of your business is recurring annuity business, i.e. long-term contracts?
We do that calculation fairly often, and it's in the order of about 70% of our business.
Right. The next question says, the business seems to be mainly in bulk deliveries. Any plans to take advantage of the increased logistics required following the surge in online shopping to residents?
That's a very specialized niche. We have been there in the past. We're not there at the moment, and we have no plans to get into that in the immediate future. It is a very, very it's got criteria that you have to meet in order to perform in that market. We, at this point in time, are not keen to enter into that market. We are really at the stage of products, primary products, as I mentioned to you, or abnormal logistics. We're not that focused on last mile of delivery that I think that your question is talking about. We may well get to go so in the future. There's no plans whatsoever, though, to do that at the moment.
Okay, the next question says, with the economy not doing so well, where do you see revenue growth coming from?
Okay, as I mentioned to you, that one of the reasons we have a specialist or specialization in looking at analytics, in other words, making sure the data that we generate such that it can make us much more productive. And if we're more productive, it means our pricing can be much more clean. If our pricing is much more clean, it means we can take work away from our competitors. And in a market that is contracting, you really have no other option but to make sure that your service delivery levels are exceptionally high, that your cost base is as low as possible, and that you have the whole mix working to the extent that you can actually get the benefits of those. And that has to be a strategy right now. Of course, we continue to look at new customers. We look at servicing our existing customers to make sure they don't move on. And we look at getting new customers to add to our customer base. But in a large extent, in a market such as this, it's a zero-sum game. And you know what you take away from somebody, they lose, clearly. And there's not much to replace it. So it's a difficult business right now. And it really means those of us that have got a lot of ability to focus on our productivity will be the ones that'll survive and prosper in periods like this.
Ian, last question, and this one is actually from me. Reading your annual report for last year, you'd outlined the strategy and scorecard for, say, last year in terms of your targets. For this year, taking into consideration COVID, to what extent have your targets had to change or your strategy have to change going into 2020 right now?
Okay, so that's a good question because, and maybe the way I can answer it is by telling you how we responded to the COVID pandemic. We were in a position where we said that we were not prepared to tolerate any one of our 12 businesses making a loss. In other words, we couldn't fund anybody's losses. Every single business had to make a profit. Particularly in light of the fact that we've got Umlaas Road, which was a capital investment, which we're only finishing off in October and November of this year. So we couldn't tolerate any losses whatsoever. So we did a number of things. We had to right-size our business with immediate effect, and we did that in a number of ways. Focus on analytics. That we would they'd simply park during the course of the lockdown and any downturn that came as a result of that. And there were a whole host of other things that we had to do. And the long and short of it is that we came out of that, and companies are putting this information in the public domain. Ours already is in the public domain. But I can tell you that every single one of our businesses is trading profitably. The interesting thing is we've got the first 3 months, the first quarter of this year under our belt. Every single business is ahead of budget. I must say that the budget was taken with COVID into account. But more tellingly, I think, is that we're ahead of last year for the first quarter of this year. So we've done the cuts and the right sizing, and we've taken the pain that we need to take. We'll now see what the market is doing, and it seems like it's fairly robust at this stage. And in many cases, it's surprising us how robust it is. But the fact of the matter is we're well placed with our cost base really being attuned to the difficult times that we're in. And I think well placed going forward. So, Nastassia, yeah, we've made the cuts that we need to do. We've budgeted accordingly, and we're performing well according to those budgets that we've set ourselves.
Ian, unfortunately, we've run out of time. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. And thank you once again to the attendees and those who've asked questions. The playback facility for this recording will be uploaded. So if there's anything that you missed or anything that you want to go back to, you're more than welcome to do that. And of course, we are going to be announcing the winners for that Fin Me Up course on Wednesday. Ian, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Natasha. Thank you to everybody for listening to my story.